Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
Good evening, listeners, and welcome to another edition of Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I'm your host, Otis Chirey, host of the Scary Stories Told in the Dark podcast, filling in for Geoff Sturtevant. And tonight's tale, well, let's just say if you've ever felt uneasy near the ocean, you're about to get a whole new reason to stay landlocked. There are places the maps forgot. Places the tides conceal. Some are peaceful, others, not so much. And if you ever find yourself offshore and spot something watching you from below, best hope your hull is marked and your offerings made. But before we descend into the deep, a few surface-level reminders. If our stories linger in your mind, or keep you double-checking the locks at night, help us keep the nightmares coming. Leave a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever your ears call home. Watching on YouTube? Like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that bell. You never know when the next storm might hit. Looking for even more chills? Head to chillingtalesfordarknights.com and become a patron. For only $7.99 a month, or even less with an annual plan, you'll get early access, exclusive content, and ad-free horror from the best in the business. Your support keeps our lights off, just the way we like it. We're also lurking on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, so come find us in the shadows. Now then, turn off the lights, turn on the dark, and let's begin. Tonight's feature takes us far from the safety of the shore and deep into a stretch of sea few dare to speak of. A fisherman relocates to a quiet coastal village in search of fortune. But what he finds waiting in the water isn't just superstition. It's something older, something vengeful, and it doesn't forgive. This haunting tale was penned by Ryan Peacock, and it's brought to life tonight by a name many of you will recognize. He's a longtime friend of the show, an award-winning producer, audio engineer, and horror narrator whose YouTube channel, TheGhostOf94, is quickly becoming a go-to destination for immersive horror. His work blends traditional narration with original scoring and sound design to deliver nightmares you can feel in your bones. He last joined us back in episode number 350, The Restless Dead, where his performance left us cold and haunted in the best way. And tonight he's back, alongside Jesse Cornett and Valentine Ojeda for a tale you won't soon forget. Performed, produced, and fully scored by Felipe Ojeda, with music mixing and mastering by Felipe himself. This is I Can Never Return to the Ocean by Ryan Peacock.
I've been a fisherman for a very long time. It's what I know. All I know. I'll confess, it's probably not the most glamorous job that a man can have. But if you know what you're doing, you can earn a living. I always figured I'd use my youth to make as much money as I could, save up a pretty little nest egg, and then retire young. Find myself a wife, maybe have a few kids, and find some other work. As plans go, mine wasn't bad, and it wasn't anything that I hadn't seen other guys like me pull off before. The difference between me and them, though, was Ash Bay. If you've never heard of it, I'm not surprised. Ash Bay is something of a hidden gem among the quiet stretch of coastline in eastern Canada. I won't say exactly where for reasons that will become clear later, but if you're really that determined, it's not hard to find. Not a lot of people fish the waters around there, though. They generally go out much further, and as a result, you'll usually only see local ships in the 30 or 50 mile stretch between Ash Bay and the deeper parts of the Atlantic. It's always easy to tell which ships are local, too. They're usually smaller fishing trawlers, but that's not what makes them distinct. No. What makes them stand out is the markings on the bottom hull. White, painted swirls and patterns. You can always just see the tops of them extending just over the water. I never quite understood why they did that. I also never understood why I only saw the Ash Bay ships out in that stretch of water. Everyone else just seemed to avoid that particular area. I always figured that there was just nothing to catch. Then, of course, I started hearing stories of the hauls of fish that people in that area were bringing in. I think the first person who told me about it was a guy I hired a couple of years back. He'd worked in Ash Bay for a few years and only recently left to be closer to his family. But the way he told it, those waters were absolutely teeming with fish, and the ships out that way only needed to head out for a week or so before coming back with a full hold. Anywhere else, you would have been out at sea for at least a month or so. I vaguely recall thinking that he was bullshitting me at the time, but it wasn't long until he convinced me to visit the area. Any doubts I had were gone by the end of the day. The waters were teeming with fish. I filled my hold in no time at all, and when I went out again, I wasted no time in heading back out there. The waters of Ash Bay didn't disappoint. They never have. I thought I was being smart by packing up and moving out to Ash Bay. By the time I made the move, I'd already been fishing around those waters for the better part of a year, and figured I might as well save myself the fuel I'd been wasting by sailing out that way for so long. I'd been turning a pretty profit ever since I started fishing in the area, so cutting out the fuel expense just made sense. Even before I made the move, I was aware of the peculiarities of the locals, but I didn't think much of them. What town doesn't have a few odd quirks? Peculiarities are to be expected, especially in a place where most of the population consisted of sailors and fishermen. Anyone who spent enough time on the water can tell you that we're a superstitious lot, and Ash Bay was a little more superstitious than most, especially when it came to the Stone Lady. During one of my earlier visits, before I decided to move there, I'd seen the Stone Lady down by the harbor. She was a weathered statue, depicting the torso of a nude woman that had been eroded down by decades, if not centuries of exposure to the elements. Moss had grown over much of the stone, covering her arms and most of her hair. She reminded me a little bit of the old painting, The Birth of Venus, or an old ship's figurehead, though it was hard to make out any of her worn features clearly. She had clearly once been a beautiful woman with a crown of reeds around her head. Delicately carved waves seemed to rise up around her legs. As far as I could tell, her eyes were closed. The look carved into her face was one of peace and serenity. At a glance, I might have thought she belonged in a museum as opposed to being exposed to the elements by the coast. But just looking at her, It was clear that she was a source of reverence to the locals, and that she didn't belong anywhere else but where she was. There were countless flowers laid down at the base of the statue, and countless beaded necklaces adorned its neck, each of them lovingly handcrafted. The statue sat within its own stone circle, not touched by anything else. It seemed almost like an altar, although the significance of it all was lost on me at the time. It wasn't until after the move that I ever got a chance to ask anyone about it. David Shriver had lived in Ash Bay his entire life. Just by looking at the man, I knew that he knew his way around a trawler, and we hit it off quickly. Most of my old crew wasn't interested in following me to a new town, so I started looking for help before I finished moving in. Shriver had been one of the first men who'd answered my job posting, and we agreed to meet for a beer at a local pub. One beer quickly turned into 3 or 4, and we got into talking when I asked him about the statue down by the harbor.
What? The goddess of the sea?
He asked.
It's something of a local superstition. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the folks around here put a lot of stock in that kind of thing. Generally, the tradition is that before you go out, you give an offering to the statue of the goddess to assure your safe return. Beads or flowers, usually. Mostly it's the wives and the children who do it, but I've known a few men who'll make their own beaded necklaces while they're ashore and bring them to the statue in the morning before they cast off.
I take it you don't put much stock in it? I asked. Shriver was quiet for a moment before he answered. He took a thoughtful swig of his beer.
Never been entirely sure what I thought of it, honestly, but never hurts to feel like you've stacked the odds in your favor, does it?
I suppose not. What about those markings on the hulls of the boats? That have anything to do with the goddess? The smile he'd been wearing a few moments back faded and was replaced by a more serious look.
Yes and no,
he said.
I've heard a few different answers from a few different people. My dad believed that the markings were there so that if the goddess ever looks up, she knows that we're a friend. Otherwise, she might take offense to someone trespassing in her waters and sink the ship. Someone else said it was to help the boat stay afloat. Most versions I've heard are variations of the first one. Which reminds me, we should see about getting your hull painted.
I hadn't expected him to bring up painting the hull, so it caught me a little by surprise. What for? I asked.
Well, like I said, never hurts to stack the odds in your favor.
Shriver took a pull on his beer. I suppose, but I don't really see the point. I've been fishing these waters for about a year or so now. I've done just fine without using whatever patterns you folks have on your hulls.
So far,
Shriver replied.
Look, I can't force you, but you'll have an easier time getting men on your boat if it's painted. Maybe it's just superstition, maybe not. Either way, what have you got to lose?
I let myself think it over for a moment. It's not like it would have impacted the performance of the boat or anything, although having it hauled out of the water and painted to satisfy some superstition that wasn't my own seemed like a bit more of a hassle than I wanted to put up with. We'd have a hell of a time getting that done before we head out, I said. Don't get me wrong. I don't mind if you're the superstitious sort. That'd be a hell of an expense, though.
I'd just think of it as a safety precaution.
Shriver said. His tone was blunt and matter-of-fact. I shook my head and took another swig of my beer.
Maybe when we come back to port, and we got some more money to spend,
I said.
Right now, it seems like a bit more trouble than it's worth.
I could tell that Shriver didn't like that answer, but he wasn't about to get in my face over a fairy tale. Still, it only felt right to cut him a bit of slack. Sailors and fishermen are a superstitious lot. This wasn't the strangest thing I'd heard them do to stack the odds of coming home alive in their favor.
I'll make an offering to the statue, if it'll set your mind at ease,
I said.
And when we come back, we'll talk about paying the hull some more.
Shriver nodded.
That'll do.
He said, although he didn't sound quite so sure about that. He took a reluctant sip of his beer, and that was the last we said on the subject. He wasn't wrong about having some trouble hiring hands for the boat. A few men I spoke to turned me down outright when they saw my hull wasn't painted. Superstition. It was almost enough to make me delay heading out to just get that stupid paint job over with. But moving isn't cheap. I had expenses that took priority, and putting my boat out of commission for a few days to get that job done would have put me in a tighter spot than I was comfortable with. I was grateful that Shriver never pressed the issue, and he thankfully knew where to find some young men who didn't think too hard about superstition. I had my crew within a few days, and it wasn't long before we were ready to head out. I honored my word for our first trip, of course. As I made my way down to the harbor at dawn, I approached the moss-covered statue and laid some flowers at its base. The weathered face regarded me indifferently, its features almost invisible in the shadows of the dawn. Maybe it's silly, but I couldn't help but feel there was something slightly off as I laid the flowers at its feet. It was probably just in my head. I was letting Shriver's superstition get to me. Rationally, I knew there was no reason to feel anything towards that statue. It didn't change the fact that looking at it, I couldn't help but feel a deep, uneasy pit in my stomach, as if my guts were all tied up in knots. I stared back at the statue, then I backed away. Even with its eyes closed, I could have sworn that it was still watching me. It had to be my imagination, my own superstition taking charge. I tried not to dwell on it as I headed down to the docks to make our final preparations for our launch. We made it out to open water with no issues. The sun was just rising as we sailed eastward into it, and I felt that familiar peace that always comes to me when I'm out on the water. It wasn't long before I forgot about the superstitions of Ash Bay. I had a good crew of men who were eager to work, and despite his superstitions, I trusted Shriver as a reliable second-in-command. He already wasn't letting me down. From the bridge, I could see him getting the men prepared to drop the nets once we were in deep enough water. Our first day went about as well as it could have. When we pulled up our nets, they were absolutely filled with fish. The crew spent the better part of the afternoon processing and packing our catch in ice. Rinse and repeat for the second day. I was anticipating to be back home by the end of the week, and admittedly, the color of my hull was the furthest thing from my mind. I had no problems on these waters before. Why would I start having them now? Then came the third day. I knew something was wrong when we pulled in the nets. A full net has weight to it. The sheer volume of fish is obvious once you start reeling it in. However, an empty net came in differently. There's no resistance, no weight to it. considering how rich the waters had been before, I knew something was off. Both Shriver and I were on deck when the net got pulled in. Two of the boys he'd hired were standing by it, watching as the rope pulled it back aboard. Even before it had returned to the boat, I could see the problem. The net, what was left of it, trailed through the water, floating on the surface like a dead thing.
It must have snapped.
I heard one of the boys say as he pulled it aboard.
Maybe it caught something underwater. A rock or something.
Shriver stood beside me, dead silent, his brow furrowed. I didn't need to ask to know that he knew better. So did I. Could be, I said, although as I looked at the torn ends of the net, I couldn't help but feel that this had been no accident. The net looked like it had been cut open with a blade. Sure, maybe it could have been an accident, but my gut told me otherwise. I looked up at the water. It was a gray day out, and the surface seemed almost black against the dreary sky. But for a moment, in the distance, I swore I saw something moving. A splash of something large dove back down beneath the waves. I knew Shriver saw it too. I looked over at him to see his eyes narrowed at the horizon, and I could sense the tension in his posture. He'd seen what I'd seen, and something told me that he knew what it was. Shriver came to me after supper to talk. I'd been up in the wheelhouse, enjoying a cigarette and bringing us a little further eastward. I'd had good luck in that area before. I expected to do so again.
You got a moment?
He asked, after knocking on the doorframe.
Course,
I replied.
what's on your mind?
Oh, I think it might be best to head back to Ash Bay.
He said.
We pulled in a decent haul, and it should be enough for wages and bills. We can come back once the hull's painted.
Go back? I asked. Now? We're barely half full.
And we're down a net. Look, I haven't pressed this issue. You're not a superstitious man, right? I can respect that. I'm not really one for superstition myself, but I also don't ignore when something clearly isn't right. I've been fishing these waters for 20 years now, and I've seen things. And I know when a trip is about to turn bad. I'm asking you, as a friend, let's go home. Paint the hull, then we can come back out. If it's money you're worried about, I'll even forego my wages on this trip.
This sort of plea sounded odd, coming from the likes of him. Looking into his eyes, I could see an all too sincere concern. Part of me wanted to humor him, but the rest of me didn't understand his cause for concern.
We can fix the net and cast it again tomorrow,
I said.
but I don't see any point in going all the way back home.
He didn't like that answer. I knew he wouldn't.
At the very least, can we go no further out?
He asked, almost pleading with me.
Call me crazy if you like, but I believe that if we venture too far from the land, we won't be seeing it again.
I bit my lip, but having already dismissed his concerns already, I didn't have it in me to do so again.
I'll bring us closer to home,
I promised him.
but I won't head back, at least not until we've cast our nets tomorrow.
That answer seemed to satisfy him, even if not completely. I saw him exhale a breath he'd been holding before he nodded.
All right. I suppose that's enough.
He hardly seemed satisfied, but he wasn't going to argue with me.
Just stay close to home and don't keep us out much longer. I can't shake the feeling that we've worn out our welcome out here.
He left without a further word, heading below deck to see the crew. I almost asked him to stay, so I could ask him what he meant. I wish that maybe I had. My eyes returned to the darkened horizon. The lights of the boat illuminated the black waters, and I almost thought I saw something bobbing against the waves. For a moment, it was gone when I tried to focus on it. We cast our nets again the next day. I'd held true to my promise to set a course closer to home. Ash Bay was visible in the distance. We weren't more than a few hours from home. I wasn't happy to be that close to land, but it seemed like an ideal compromise, given Shriver's concerns. Regardless, the day carried on without incident. We brought in our nets after a few hours with no issues and received a generous haul for our troubles. We started hauling in the second net next. Judging by the resistance, I knew it was probably full, and my high spirits almost made me forget all about the strangeness from yesterday. Maybe I would have forgotten them completely if it all didn't come rushing back mere moments later. As the net was pulled in, I could see the writhing of live fish inside of it. It wasn't until we brought it around to empty it onto the deck that I noticed there was something else in there. The sight of what looked to be a human arm jetting out of the side of the net made my heart skip a beat. My breath caught in my throat for a moment. I feared we'd just found a body. Maybe if I'd been faster, I could have stopped them from emptying the net. Then again, what good would that have done? The net was emptied, and its contents spilled all over the deck. Amongst the falling bodies of fish, I saw something large and man-shaped tumble onto the deck amongst them. It hit the metal with a heavy thud, followed by an even heavier silence. Neither I nor Shriver nor the other men spoke as we looked at what lay in amongst the mass of flopping, dying fish, although we could all see it clearly. I, for one, certainly didn't believe what I was seeing, but that didn't make it any less real. From the waist up, she looked more or less like an ordinary woman. Her hair was long and tangled. Her skin was smooth and seemed as if it would be soft to the touch, although it was riddled with deep cuts from the net. No doubt she'd gotten them struggling to escape it. She had an athletic physique and small bare breasts, although those were not what any of us were looking at. No, the eyes of every man on that boat were trained below her breasts, on her sides, beneath her arms, and in between her ribs were several slits in her skin. They reminded me of the gills of a shark, and I can imagine that's exactly what they were. Gills. Beneath her waist was a strong finned tail with silver scales that ended in a fluke, not unlike that of a whale, although it seemed far more delicate. She had no legs, only that tail. Never in all my years had I imagined I'd ever see a mermaid. I'd always thought they were nothing more than fairy tales. But what else could I have called that which sat before me other than a mermaid? A mermaid who was still alive, if only barely. Her eyes opened, and she seemed to look around at us. Her arms moved, although her motions were sluggish, weak. She seemed to gasp as she struggled to move. We just watched her, too in awe of her to think to help. Most of us were, anyways. One of the boys that Shriver had hired took a step toward her, although as he did, Shriver himself put up an arm to stop him.
No!
He cried.
No! Leave it. Let it die.
Those words snapped me out of my gaze. Let it die? I repeated. We should help it.
Believe me, if the stories I've heard about these things are true, then it would not care to do the same for us. Let it die,
he said, although I could see him doubting his own words. The mermaid let out a growl of exertion before she rolled herself onto her stomach. She looked up at us, teeth clenched in pain. Her teeth looked razor sharp, like a predator's teeth, not a human's. But if she meant to attack us, she didn't have the strength. Her body seemed to collapse again as she struggled to breathe. I could see fresh blood pooling underneath her. She was bleeding out. We should throw her overboard, I said. Come on, let's get rid of her then, before she dies. Shriver remained still as I ran up to help the mermaid. The crewmen joined me. Between us, we were able to pick the wheezing, dying mermaid up. She seemed to recoil from us at first, but she didn't have the strength to fight us off, even if she wanted to. We picked her up, and aside from a weak hiss of protest, she could do nothing but cling onto one of the men for support. We brought her to the edge of the boat, and as we did, I saw the faces bobbing against the waves. Other mermaids, more than I could count, all of them watching us, judging us for what we'd do next. The sight of them made me freeze for a moment, before I remembered just what it was we'd set out to do. The mermaid we'd caught was dying, and maybe they could save her. I wish we could have been more gentle with how we sent her back to her people. With bloody hands, we tossed her overboard and let her fall back into the water, which turned red as she sank beneath it. I saw several other mermaids dive down after her, and after a few moments, they resurfaced, clutching their fallen comrade close. They looked at us before taking her back beneath the waves. It was the last I saw of her. The others lingered, though. They watched us intently, and I'd be lying if I said their cold, inhuman stares did not send a chill through me. Behind me, I could hear Shriver approaching. He stared out into the sea of unforgiving faces, and I could sense the dread radiating off of him.
I do not think that was the right call,
he said softly.
although I don't know what would have been.
One by one, the faces began to disappear beneath the waves until one remained. It looked to be a young woman with long brown hair that bobbed around her head. She wore a wreath of reeds around her head, and her green eyes burned into me with an intensity that turned to my stomach. From beneath the surface of the water, she raised an arm, and in her pale hand, she held an ornate weapon, an axe with a wide fan-like blade. She pointed it directly at me, almost as if uttering a threat, before she turned and sank down beneath the waves with her sisters. We were silent, with only the sound of the ocean filling the air in the wake of what just happened. It was Shriver who spoke first.
We need to get back to shore. Now. Before they come back.
He didn't wait for my permission. He didn't need to. Shriver made for the wheelhouse to steer us home, and I was grateful that he did. My hands were shaking. It took me a few moments to gather my thoughts enough to register what needed to be done. We didn't bother packing the bounty from the nets. If anything, we let the fish die and rot in the sun. We were a few hours from shore, and suddenly, that seemed too far away. We kept a lookout on the water, but it didn't do us much good. When the attack came, it came from beneath us, and it came so suddenly that I'm not even sure we could have prepared for it. As the boat sped homeward, it rocked suddenly as something struck the hull beneath us. I sent one of the men down to check on it. He came up a moment later, running as if the devil itself was on his tail.
We're taking on water,
he cried.
Something tore a hole in us.
No sooner had the words left his mouth Then the boat was hit again. This time it rocked hard enough to throw me off my feet. The engine seemed to sputter. In the wheelhouse, I could see a look of utter terror on Shriver's face. I wasted no time in running up to check on him. "What's our condition?" I asked.
Not good. I think something just damaged the engine. Yeah, we're losing speed.
He said.
In our current state, we might be able to limp home, but might. But when our state gets worse...
Damn it. I knew at that moment that the ship was going down. There wasn't a damn thing I could do to stop it. But maybe we didn't have to go down with it. "Let's get the dinghies ready. Put up flares to call for help. We're close enough to shore. Someone will see us."
Yeah.
Shriver nodded solemnly before I left him. I took the crewmen to get the dinghies, small inflatable things that wouldn't get us far. But given our circumstances, they were exactly what we needed. We hauled them to the front of the deck and got them inflated. As we did that, I felt another impact rock the boat. Shriver left the wheelhouse. I could see a flare gun in his hand, and he aimed it at the sky and fired. The flare arced upward, and as it did, I told myself that we'd be okay. After that, everything was a blur. I remember the final impact that struck the boat. I remember that it threw me to my feet. I remember feeling the ground tilt beneath me as the boat began to tilt, but I never saw what tilted it. It couldn't have been the mermaids, could it? All I knew is that 1 minute I was sure that we were going home, and the next, the boat was tilting. I was falling, and when I landed, I was enveloped by the cold, black water of the ocean. I remember seeing some of the men in the water around me. I think that Shriver was among them. I think that he was the first one they grabbed. It was hard to see underwater. In the chaos, it was hard to be sure what was happening. But I'm sure that I saw Shriver just a few feet away from me at the moment before a figure swam up from beneath him, grabbed him around the waist, and pulled him deeper under the water. Maybe it's just a trick of my memory, but I almost swear that I could hear him screaming the entire time. I could see more of them coming, rising out of the blackness of the depths. I remember the panic in my chest as I tried to swim away. Looking up, I could see one of the dinghies we'd inflated. I could see the white patterns on the bottom of it, almost identical to the ones the larger ships had. I didn't think about the mermaids. I didn't think about the crew. I just thought about the dinghy, and I swam upwards until I felt my hand against the bottom of it. I pulled myself up onto the surface and tried not to imagine the cold hands reaching out from the depths to pull me down. The flare was still in the sky when I broke the surface. It had reached its highest point and was coming down slowly. But someone had to have seen it. Ash Bay was close. They definitely would have seen it, right? God, I hoped I was right. I looked back at my boat. It had capsized, and from the dinghy, I could see deep gashes in the hull. Deeper gashes than could have been caused by weapons. But despite that, the waters around me were calm. Too calm. None of the crew surfaced around me. Neither did any of the mermaids, although I was still certain that I could see shapes moving beneath the surface of the water. Figures circling my dinghy, deciding whether or not to sink it. I prayed to whatever god would listen that they wouldn't do it. Maybe I got lucky that day. Maybe it was the markings on the bottom of the dinghy that dissuaded them. I can't say for sure. I was picked up by another boat about an hour later. By then, my boat had almost completely disappeared beneath the waves. They looked for my crew, but they never found them. I can't say I'm surprised. As they brought me back to Ash Bay, I couldn't help but look out at the waters behind us, where my boat was sinking. I knew I saw a single head raised above the water. I knew that a pair of bitter green eyes watched me as I left. I still see those green eyes in my dreams every night. I left Ash Bay a few weeks later. I put the house I'd bought up for sale and cut my losses. It seemed like the only sensible thing to do. I remembered that as I drove out of town that last time, I passed by the harbor and took one final look at that statue they kept there. Just the sight of it sent chills through me. Were I a braver man, maybe I would have taken a hammer to it in defiance of what it stood for. But I can only imagine that it would have ended badly in one way or another, and I had no interest in continuing to tempt fate. I've been a fisherman for a very long time. It's what I know. All I know. I came to Ash Bay for the fishing, and I left with nothing. I don't know where I'll go now. I don't know where I'll go next. But I know that my days as a fisherman are over. I can never return to the ocean now. I've worn out my welcome. I know that they'll be waiting for me. She'll be waiting for me. Maybe I deserve whatever fate they bestow upon me. Maybe I'm a coward for avoiding it. Maybe.
That was I Can Never Return to the Ocean, written by Ryan Peacock, performed and produced by Felipe Ojeda, and featuring the incredible vocal talents of Jesse Cornett and Valentine Ojeda. Music, mixing, and mastering for tonight's production were all handled by Felipe himself, and once again he delivered an experience as immersive as it is terrifying. From the cold silence of the open sea to the final gurgle beneath the waves, this performance reeled us in, and then dragged us screaming to the bottom. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, I cannot recommend The Ghost of 94 enough. Felipe's channel is a treasure trove of full-cast horror dramas, original music, and soundscapes so rich you'll forget where reality ends. He's on YouTube, Instagram, X, and Reddit under the same name, The Ghost of 94. So go give him a follow and tell him Chilling Tales sent you. And if you missed his previous appearance with us on episode number 350, The Restless Dead, that's another must listen. The man knows how to haunt your headphones. If tonight's descent into the deep sent shivers down your spine or left you side-eyeing your bathtub, do us a favor and leave a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you turn in. Watching on YouTube? Hit that thumbs up, drop a comment, and subscribe with notifications on. Let us know what rattled you most. Was it the eyes in the surf, the statue at the dock, or the moment the nets came back not quite empty? Want even more nightmares, ad-free and early? Visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com and become a patron for just $7.99 a month, or even less annually. You'll unlock early access to all our episodes, exclusive bonus stories, and the satisfaction of supporting independent horror creators. And as always, don't forget to find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're just one scream away. I've been your host, Otis Gyrie, and it has been my honor to guide you into tonight's unforgiving depths. Join us every Monday and Wednesday for new stories, new voices, and new reasons to keep the lights on. Until next time, sweet dreams, listeners. Sweet dreams.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.